I'd like to welcome and introduce you to someone who has been published in the British Ophthalmology magazine, has done numerous lectures throughout the world, including Moorfields, Alcon, and Allergen. He specializes in dry eye, and he has set up a support group that provides information to the group and patients. He's now based at Milton Keynes University Hospital, and I'm introducing you to Dr. Colin Parsloe.
Thank you very much, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk about something that I'm desperately passionate about. I am absolutely passionate about getting education of dry eye disease out to patients. I do run a website called mydryeye.com, and our aim is to be the key source for patients to go to, or for people who live with this disease to go to get solid, reliable information on dry eye disease. Now, I've done a 2-day talk, 16 hours talk just on dry eye disease. I've got 16 minutes today, or 15 minutes today, to try and cover the basics. So I'm going to try and point you to our website. It's mydryeye.com. I'm just going to get my slide up over here. So I'm just going to see if I can get my full screen up here. We run dry disease. We have a 2-hour-long dry disease course that explains dry disease in detail. We run webinars specifically for patients every 2 months. We have Q&A sessions with me, and we review products that other patients with dry disease use in real life and give their fair comments on their products. Now, my journey with aniridia and dry eyes starts with 3 patients that I have here at Milton Keynes, wonderful people with aniridia. And I was always aware of, PAX6. We know PAX6 is involved very early on in the development of the eye, and it affects so many different parts of the eye. We're all obviously aware of the loss of the iris and also glaucoma and cataracts. But what's less common, at least amongst the eye care specialists, is the effect on dry eye disease in the ocular surface. So I spent a lot of time looking into this and researching it. And I'm going to start with some general stuff about what is dry eye disease, how does it look in general, and then we'll look at the aniridia specific components of dry eye disease. So what is dry eye disease? This is a very brief summary of the definition. I was part of this international group that spent 3 years just studying dry eye disease, and we published this really important international report on what it is. It's basically, to take it right down to the fundamental, it's a loss of the normal balance of the tearfilm components, and that results in symptoms for people. So what is normal? We're going to look at what is the normal, what's the effect on the surface of the eye when you get dry eye disease, what happens in aniridia, and what can we do about it. So normal. The tearfilm is an amazingly complex layer of water on the surface of the eye. It's water and a gel. I've always thought of it as, I've always wondered, how does water stick on a vertical surface of the eye? It would just run off normally. So what we've learned is a tear is actually a gel, a very thick gel that sticks on the surface of the eye. It's got a very thick component closer to the surface, and as we go away from the surface of the eye, it gets more watery. And then there's this oil layer that seals it, that stops the rapid evaporation of the tears. The oil layer comes from little glands in the eyelids. So you have a little gland in the upper lid and a little gland in the lower lid that produces the oil. So if we look at the front of the eye, there are these little glands vertically on the upper lid and on the lower lid. There's about 35 on the upper lid and 25 on the lower lid. They produce the very important oil layer. But then there's also glands on the surface of the eye and a little reservoir called the lacrimal gland, which holds tears. And that's the watery component. So the water and the gel, and then you have the oil layer, and that's where they come from. So what happens when things go wrong, and what causes dry eye disease? In general, the oil layer most commonly is broken down. So you don't have enough oil sealing the tears, the water evaporates off the surface of the eye, the residual salts in the tear surface or in the tear film get very thickened and concentrated, and you get this incredibly salty solution touching the surface of the eye. This irritates the surface of the eye and causes inflammation, which causes damage. And as we get a concentrated tear film, it causes more damage. Damage of the surface of the eye causes more imbalance in the tears. That leads to more damage, more imbalance, and so on and so on. So it keeps repeating itself until it gets to something what we call the vicious circle, which is damage and inflammation, repeating. And eventually, this damages the nerves in the surface of the eye, which can lead to a chronic pain syndrome. So dry eye disease isn't just a bit of a watery eye or a bit of dryness, it's quite a severe condition. Specifically in aniridia, what are the unique parts of aniridia that make us concerned with dry eye disease? Well, there are a number of interesting studies on patients with aniridia looking at the components of the tear film and the tear film producing elements. And the one thing they noted is the actual oil producing glands were a lot thinner than normal and a lot lower in number. So the amount and the quality of the oil being produced was very poor because there were so few of them. That leads to an increased breakup of the tears. So normally when you're sitting blinking for about 20 seconds, if I have dry eye disease, so my tears break up a bit too quick, but normally people can sit and blink every 5 seconds or so we blink. But if we kept our eyes open for 20 seconds, people that with a healthy surface of the eye or healthy tears, they would have tears covering their eyes still. With those of us who have dry eye disease, and in particular people with aniridia, the tear film breaks up very rapidly. Now, when you're on a computer or when you're reading, you don't blink that often because you're concentrating. There was a study where there was a couple of boys playing a computer game, and the one boy didn't even blink for 2 minutes because he would blink, he'd die in the computer game. So it's important that we realize that we don't blink as much when we're reading, and that is why after 5 seconds or so, if your tears break up, the rest of the time you've got big dry patches on the surface of your eye, and you'll find that reading or concentrating on computers, watching television, your eyes will feel a lot worse afterwards. And that will dry out the tears. And another thing they found with people with aniridia was that their tear volume was concentrated. The interesting findings were it was an average age of about 32 that patients were recruited into the study. And at the age of 32, there was a really severe loss of the glands that produce oil, severe concentration of the tears. But in addition, the little cells that cover the surface of the eye, the clear window that you look through, the cornea, these cells, they broke down very easily. The cells on our surface of our eye are susceptible to the blinking. The eyelids work like a windscreen wiper, kind of rubbing over, up and down over the surface of the eye. And there's a lot of friction there. And this friction can loosen some of these small little cells. But that's okay because we've got some what we call stem cells around the outside of the eye that grow and replace those cells that are lost. But in patients with aniridia, there was a deficiency in the stem cells. So the small little cells that were being lost weren't being replaced quickly enough. So that makes the symptoms of dry eyes a lot worse in patients with aniridia. They then had to look deeper into the surface of the eye, the clear window, to look at the nerve structure in the clear window of the eye in the cornea. And they found that the nerve structure was abnormal as well. And it all goes back to PAC6 being so important as an early step in the development of the eye, that not only does the iris not form properly, but a lot of the other structures are involved. So we need to be aware that the nerves, the surface of the eye, the tear-producing components, the tear itself are all affected in patients with aniridia. What makes us blink and what makes us aware of the dryness of our eye is the fact that as the tears evaporate off the surface of our eye, the tear film itself, the liquid, cools down just a fraction. And there are nerves in the surface of the eye that measure this cooling. They then send a message subconsciously to the brain that says, blink, everything's cooling, there's some dry patches. Then your eye blinks and you get a nice, thick, clear layer of tears that come over the eye again. But if your nerve structure is not working properly, you won't get that message to blink again. And by the time you get enough cooling and enough drying on the eye to blink, it's already too late and you've caused some damage to the surface of the eye. That damage causes inflammation, and if you don't have good cells that can replace and can heal the damage, then you're going to have much worse dry eyes, hence why it's significantly worse in patients with aniridia. So, what can we do about it? The important thing in managing dry eye disease is to be assessed appropriately by an eye care specialist. No online training or informal advice can replace that. I'm very active in social media and on a lot of the dry eye forums, and you'll be surprised at some of the advice that's being shared there. It's good that people are out there putting things forward and we are sharing ideas, but you need to get a very good assessment. That's the key thing when we look after our eyes. We need to do good eye hygiene. So I always think of eyes and teeth as being similar in the sense that we would brush our teeth twice a day, and you see a dentist say every 6 months just for a checkup, and you'll maybe go to the oral hygienist who would just tidy things up a bit to look after your teeth. But our eyes, we don't do that. And we have these glands in our eyes, the 35 at the top, 25 at the bottom. People with aniridia are born with less, or have less, at least by the age of 32, according to the research. So you have less of these glands, and they don't grow back again. We lose these glands if we don't look after them. So my advice would be to do general things like to wash your face, and including your eyes, and to give that particular attention with soap and water at least twice a day. Normal eyelid hygiene. See an eye care specialist every 6 months or at least once a year. An optometrist could be someone, especially someone who's aware of dry eyes, could be someone who can monitor your eyes for you. If they find something wrong, if they say, okay, look, you've got some problems on the debris on the eyelashes, then you need to clean that. If they say that oil in your oil-producing glands are of a poor quality, we need to deal with that. And I'll touch on that shortly. One of the most common things we talk about is replacing the tear film with an eye drop. So eye drops, you get various forms of eye drops. And the whole principle behind putting eye drops in is you're going to dilute this very concentrated salty tear solution that's irritating, burning the surface of the eye. So you put a drop in, it dilutes it. But then again, if you don't have a good oil layer, it's just going to evaporate off again. The salts will concentrate again, and then you'll get a sore eye, and you need to put a drop in again and again and again. Some patients need drops every hour. I try and reduce it down to a maintenance dose of twice daily if possible for most patients. And there's various things we can do to try and do that. But that's the principle behind putting the eye drops in regularly. So as I said, we have a fixed number of glands, and they get lost in patients with aniridia. We need to make sure we maximize the productivity of those remaining glands. We need to look after them. Why do the glands get blocked? It could be that you have inflammation on the eyelid. As I said, build up a debris on the lashes, or something internally which makes the production of the oil to be a poor quality oil. So instead of a nice thin virgin olive oil type consistency, the oil is thick and buttery, and that blocks the glands. Once the gland gets blocked, pressure builds up, and you lose the little cells that produce this good quality oil, and eventually you'll lose that gland. Again, with aniridia, you have a shortage of glands to start off with. You've got to protect those glands that are still there. So, wash your face, see the eye care specialist, clean the lashes, and then the next one I'm going to spend a bit of time on is the antibacterial hot compresses. So here I've tried to draw an illustration of the eyelid with these little glands. Now these glands are a bit brownish because they're thick and buttery. They're buttery glands. So what you do, once you apply heat to the surface of the eye, this heat will melt the oils and make them more liquid. So it takes away the buttery consistency and reduces it to a nice thin melted oil, and then you need to massage it out. So with your finger, you apply pressure to just above the eyelashes. You just apply pressure like that. That pressure will squeeze the melted oil out and allow healthy new oils to form within the glands. So to touch on eye drops, basically there's no one size fits all. And this is the main question. A lot of patients come and ask me, which one drop do I need, doctor? Which one will work? And I've learned over time that even the one that looks best on paper, and I say, use this one, it'll definitely work. They come back and say, no, that didn't work for me, but I found this one that worked. So you've got to, it's a bit of trial and error, but there are some principles. Definitely, if you have aniridia, don't use preserved drops. There are a lot of good preservative-free drops. They are a little bit more expensive, but with the fact that in aniridia you have already a shortage of the stem cells, you don't want to be putting more preservatives and damaging the cells more. As people with aniridia have a shortage of the oil-producing glands, I would suggest trying an oil replacement drop. Now, there are a few drops available. I'm pleased to say that as of July, as of next month, there are 2 new drops coming onto the market that look very promising to replace the oil in your tear film. The previous drops, we've always struggled. So the way the natural eyelid works is you have a component that produces the water and a separate component that produces the oil. And the oil is dropped onto the surface of the eye, which protects it. We've tried to always mix the oil and the water in one bottle and try to put it in the eye. And the chemistry is very complex. So with the improvements, they are getting better quality oils. One of the complaints a lot of people had was a bit of blurring when they put the drop in. But that is going to improve. So please do ask your eye care specialist about an oil replacement drop, and hopefully that works for you. You may find it doesn't, that's fine, but at least try that, a preservative-free one. If you're not using a good quality oil replacement drop, use a high-quality gel-type drop. That's it, basically. So I'll just point you again at our website at chapter 6. We go through eye drops in great detail, explaining a way to think about it and a way to approach eye drops. But nothing can replace a good assessment by an eye care specialist and personalized advice by an eye care specialist. So I hope I haven't skimmed over it too quickly and covered a lot of it. I hope I've covered a lot of the points. So any questions? I'll be happy to open the floor to any questions now.
So we have a question from Teresa, who says, hello, my daughter, who's 3 years old, doesn't have a 40-PAX gene. How would I know if she suffers from dry eye?
Is she symptomatic? So part of the definition of dry eyes is there must be symptoms. She can have underlying changes in the eyelid, which sometimes we see when we examine patients. But if she's not complaining of a dry, burning, gritty, sore eye, the most common thing in children would be allergies. So I try and exclude that first, make sure she's got an allergy. That would be the first sign. The other thing is the same oil glands that produce the oil that covers the tear film. So when they get blocked, you can form these little lumps under the eyelids. Some people call them styes. That's not quite accurate. The correct term is chalazion. But if she gets a lot of eyelid cysts, red lumps, pea-sized lumps under the eyelid, that could be an indication that the oil-producing glands are a bit thick and there might be a problem. But if she's not complaining, she doesn't have dry eyes. Also, you can get a watery eye that is dry. So the quality of the tear is poor. It doesn't stick to the surface of the eye and runs down. So you have a watery eye, but when we're looking at the surface of the eye, we see it's dry.
Can you explain the hot press on your eye again? Do you use a flannel or something?
Okay, very good question. So I was going to touch a bit on the antimicrobial hot compressors. I would always recommend using a medical device. Now, there are a number of medical devices that you can use. They've all been proven to work at the correct temperature. You need a very high temperature, but a very tight range. You can't do it too high because you'll burn the very sensitive skin on the eyes. So there are a number of companies, and I do consult with them. So just a kind of a health warning here, I consult with a lot of companies. But there's this new move, and they're to an antibacterial hot compress. You can buy them at Boots and at other places as well on the internet. You basically microwave them, and you put them on the eye for 10 minutes, and it heats the oil, melts it. And the advantage of the antibacterial ones is once you've taken it off and you put it in storage, the antibacterial coating on the fabric kills any bacteria there, 99.9% of bacteria. So when you apply it back onto your eye, it should be a safe thing to use once you heated it again. So it's definitely, I'd use a medical product, medical device you can purchase. They're around £20 in the UK.
And can you use oil replacement drops with bandaged contact lenses?
Very good question. I would ask your optometrist. I can't see why not, as long as it's not preserved. So some of the original oil-producing drops had a very thick oil in it. And the more modern ones, the ones coming out in the next few months, I would definitely say yes, you can use oil replacement drops with a bandaged contact lens. But just do check with your eye care specialist which ones you have been recommended.
Does the amount of oil glands reduce as you get older? There's some jam in the Netherlands, going international now. Good to see.
Yes, that's a very good question. So I think they have been getting older. I suppose 50 years ago, we said, if you don't brush your teeth, will you naturally lose your teeth? And yes, you will naturally lose your teeth. But if you look after them, if you brush them and take care of them, your teeth will last longer. The same thing with your glands. If you don't look after them, if you don't heat massage, make sure they're clean and unblocked, then you are going to lose them gradually over time. And there is a gradual decline in the number of glands that you have, and a gradual increase in the number of patients who have dry eye disease the older we get.
Sinead says, when I cry, I don't shed any tears. Tears don't fall from my eyes. Is that to do with dry eye? Is there a difference between sort of when you cry versus your tears that you're talking about?
Yes, there is a difference. So we call basal tear production. Your normal day-to-day tears, the ones we're using right now, the actual tears come from glands in the white of your eye. And within the eyelid, at the top and the bottom of the eyelid, there's tears that produce the little basal, a couple of drops that you need. Then you have this reservoir over here, the lacrimal gland. It contains a lot of water. Emotions can set it off, but if you get an insect or something hit you in the eye, or an icy cold wind, your eye will squirt a lot of water just to wash it off, to naturally kind of wash out any debris in your eye. And that's a much more liquid, much more watery drop. That's why it doesn't stick on the surface of the eye as well. It overwhelms the drainage system, because what's happening right now, all of us are producing tears, and they wash across your eye and they drain out through little tubes into the back of your throat. So we're constantly swallowing our tears. But if you get a foreign body in your eye, or a very cold wind, or emotions trigger it, we get a wash of a very watery solution across our eyes. And the very first eye drops that were developed were basically salty water, because they thought that's what tears were. And they were putting it in, but it was just diluting your natural tears, the gels. Over time, we've got much better quality drops that are much more gel-like. So if you think of that, the basal tears, the tears we have right now, as a thick gel rather than a water.
Lots of questions coming in. We might have to do some of these later, but some along the lines of kind of, if there's no sign of it at the moment, do you need to keep checking for it? What age should you start doing this from? And any particular sort of product recommendations?
We should all be, especially if you have aniridia, you will be under the care of someone looking at your eye. You should be out with your optometrist, low visual aid person, your ophthalmologist. They should all be, as part of their daily routine when they examine you, would be to look for dry eye disease. And there are some telltale signs that go along with the symptoms. So as long as you go, every time you go to an eye care specialist, say, please would you mind to look if my eyes look dry today, because they will be looking for cataracts, they will be looking for glaucoma. That's the standard things we look for. And I think we need to raise their awareness of dry eye disease with aniridia, and just reminding them. My recommendation for products would be a lipid-containing drop. They're not too many of them, probably about 5 different ones you can try, or something called a hyaluronic acid, which is the gelling drop that we have in Europe. In the States, you can't get hyaluronic acid, so United States. There you would need to use like a carbon gel. So there are different options that you can use there, but make sure it's preservative free.
I'm going to be doing here, I'm going to try and let Emily, who had her hand up earlier, I'm going to try and allow her to talk.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Hi. Is this a quick question? Because my daughter gets really dry eyelids as well. Is that part of dry eye, or is that just her eczema? Because I'm really struggling because certain creams, I don't know what to do without it.
So eczema itself causes inflammation of the eyelids, and that inflammation swelling can go to the very lid margin where the little openings are for the oil glands. And that swelling can close the oil glands and make dry eyes worse. The only way dry eyes would make the skin around the eye worse is if you had a very watery eye and the water runs out, usually outside the outside corner, and it forms a little pool on the skin, and it keeps the skin all moist, and it causes problems there. I usually recommend a bit of Vaseline or a barrier cream over to protect it. But no, it sounds more like eczema is the primary problem rather than being the problem causing the dry eyes. She may have both, but I don't think the dry eyes is causing the eczema type lesions. If she manages the eczema, it's not very easy, as we all know. But if she can manage that well, it will help protect the glands.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, no problem.
And the last one, I think, at what age would you start using an antibacterial hot compress?
So these oil-producing glands, if you do go to someone who's interested in dry eyes and they turn the eyelids inside out, they can take a photograph, something called meibography, and they can count the actual glands that are working, and they can look at the quality of the gland. It's not painful, it's a bit of an odd sensation, but they can actually tell you how many glands you got functioning. The study showed at the mean age, or the average age of 32, patients had a really significant loss of glands. I would recommend as soon as somebody's found a problem with it that you start it, but definitely by the mid-20s, you should have a good assessment of the oil-producing glands and the quality and the quantity.
Okay.
I think we've covered most of the questions there, Dave.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colin, and thank you, James, for facilitating that.